Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about what I consider to be the trifecta for posterior chain development. And when I make these recommendations, I'm not saying there aren't other exercises that are good. You guys have seen me use and program RDLs. You've seen me do the same with glute bridges, stiff leg deadlifts, hip thrust, things like that. But when push comes to shove, if I really want to talk about what I think the best movements are, at least in combination for developing these areas, again, the posterior chain, meaning the spinal erectors, the glutes, the hamstrings, to some extent, maybe the adductors, right? To some extent. Again, not everyone counts them as part of the posterior chain. I oftentimes do. So these are the movements that I like, and there's a reason that I like them in combination. And you'll see a lot of my strongest clients using them. And good mornings right off the top. I like good mornings. I don't always enjoy doing them because I'm very strong at them. They're uncomfortable. They suck. You guys have seen me at different points do good mornings with well over 500 pounds with a couple different bars for maxes, work sets up in the 300s, things like that. So they're uncomfortable, so I don't enjoy doing them, but I do like them. I do like to program them. I do like to promote them because the carryover to your squat and deadlift is phenomenal. And you've heard everyone from Ben Pollock to Louis Simmons say a lot of things about the good morning, and I'm known for promoting the good morning a lot. And I'm the first to always admit I don't like doing them, and when I take them out of my program, my squat regresses. Like my deadlift does fine. My squat regresses when I take them out, which speaks volumes about it. My squat goes down 5-10% sometimes if I take them out for a month or two. It'll start regressing every single time. And that's even if I'm doing various squat work. So good morning is really like a multi-tool. It's like the Swiss Army knife of hip hinges, because we can do so many different things with it. But even in its most basic formats, with just any barbell that we're using, even with a shoulder width stance, it is an amazing builder for all of the muscles involved in hip extension. It also has tremendous squat carryover, particularly for people who struggle through the hip extension part, the top half, where hip extension is the most critical. Again, once you get up past parallel, the carryover is phenomenal. It's almost a one-to-one for certain periods of time. In other words, a lot of times if you put 50 pounds on your good morning, your squat will go up. Whatever weight you can hit on a good morning, you can always squat that weight successfully. And I've seen people who are almost at a perfect one-to-one, clients of mine have had, but even then they still always squat at least a few pounds more than they good morning. So if I just push their good morning up, their squat goes up by default. I'm talking people with, well over 2.5 times body weight raw squats. But I love that. A lot of the people will, though, talk about the risk to the back and risk of back injury. But I think something to keep in mind there, that's where the reverse hyper comes in, because the reverse hyper itself tends to bulletproof your lower back to a very large extent. And therefore, if we have access to one, we really aren't as concerned with pulls or injuries in the low back, because it dramatically reduces the chance of that happening. And usually, though, it's not just about the connective tissue and recovery there, but I've also found that low back injuries are highly correlated with weak hamstrings. In other words, weak hamstrings are going to cause you to strain your lower back more, particularly when doing movements like deadlifts and stuff. So we do need to think of the posterior chain, in terms of working all of these muscles involved and fully developing it, and fully developing the connective tissue and tendons of the spinal erectors. So it's kind of a big deal. But the reverse hypers themselves can offset whatever risk is there. Now, by that same token, I've had clients who've never had access to a reverse hyper who've good morning 500 pounds without injuries. However, I do notice they do get a little more wear and tear, a little more beat up if we're not careful. So the reverse hyper, what does it bring to the table? Well, everyone knows that I'm a massive fan of the reverse hyper. Massive fan. It is a restorative traction-based movement. It works the entire low back with a heavier emphasis Well, the whole posterior chain, but with a heavier emphasis on the lower back, again, the spinal erectors and the glutes. It's a little less hamstring dominant than some of these other movements, definitely. Definitely less so than a glute ham raise. However, it works the other areas extremely well. And it helps with recovery because it puts us into traction. It's restorative. It can help facilitate better recovery from axial loading, which would mean our squats, our deadlifts, our good mornings, things like that that compress the spine. It can help recover from that. So it's extremely valuable there in regards to that. So it adds a lot to the table to add to the good mornings. Now then we come over to the glute ham raise, and I've got people who say, well, why the glute ham raise? It doesn't even work the exact functions of the hamstring like your squat or your deadlift do. Although that's a good point, but the point is that it adds another function, right? Your good mornings and even Romanian deadlifts are amazing for eliciting a stretch reflex, also known as a myotatic reflex in the hamstrings. Therefore, when you look at them in studies, the activation is tremendously high. However, one of the three heads of the hamstring does not get particularly engaged directly while doing purely hip hinge movements. But knee flexion movements, they do. And the glute ham raise adds both. We have both hip extension and knee flexion done concurrently. So it actually works all the functions of the hamstring at the same time. And it's the only exercise that I know of that is capable of doing that. And no, when you do them on the floor, people do the natural hamstring curls or whatever they call them. It doesn't do that because you're removing the hip hinge component. So it gives the knee flexion, but not the hip hinging. So it's the combination of this together and also the ability to do a lot of different modalities on it. We can do it with bands, we can do it with chains, we can add weights, right? Most of them are adjustable for different challenges, but if it gets too easy, you can always add these three different forms of resistance. So it gives us, different training modalities completely to work with. It's a very versatile exercise if you get creative with it with these things. The different ways we can add resistance and change the strength curve. But the fact that it works all the functions of the hamstring while still working the glutes and the erectors to some extent, that's one reason I really love to pair it up with the reverse hyperextension, because it's biased the other way. But the upside is that both of these are also traction-based movements. So we have our reverse hyper, I'm so tongue-tied today, I'm just going to run with it and not edit this. We have this big workhorse, the good morning. Again, stretch reflex on the hamstrings, builds the entire, to some extent middle back, traps and everything, but definitely lower back glutes, can build adductors, but it puts compression on the spine. You add these other two movements in where we go into traction. Okay, they're easier on recovery. So we can only do so much good morning volume once we get strong at it, but then we can fill in the gaps and help recover from it with these other movements that will fully develop the rest of the posterior chain. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.